Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Drew. If it's your first time here, welcome. We are learning and exploring functional anatomy, which means we are looking at the muscles on the body and how, when they contract, what kind of movements does the muscle contracting make on the body. So essentially, to learn this, you need to kind of have a good appreciation of three real key areas. So first thing is the muscle itself. And where the muscle physically attaches onto the bone, so where the actual muscle connects physically onto the bone. Then we need to know the muscle action. So when the muscle contracts concentrically, so when it shortens and it pulls on the bones, what's the movement that it creates? What's the movement called? And then finally, we need to appreciate the joint. So which joints are moving when the muscles contract. And when you kind of have a good appreciation of those three things, they're the kind of the key foundations. And then you can build on more detail on top of that, such as agonist, antagonist, synergist muscles, nerve supply, blood supply, things like that. So today we are continuing on our exploration of the core muscles, and we are looking at this bad boy here, the external oblique. As always, we're using the app 3D for medical or complete anatomy. If you just punch that into your search engine, you'll definitely be able to find it. It's a great tool for learning anatomy, and I'll highly recommend it. And we're just going to be exploring some of the functions of the tool of the app, and I really recommend you get it yourself, and you can even follow along if you like with the video. So you can get the app, pull it up, and then you can kind of follow along, and that'll help your learning process as well. So the first stage when you're learning anatomy, functional anatomy, is you want to then, when looking at the muscular system, you go origin and insertion first. So if you come over here on the left, you go onto info. Quick facts, it says here origin, external surface of and the inferior borders of the 5th and the 12th ribs. So that tells you where the muscle is attaching on origin. And typically origin is closer to the midline, and then insertion is further away. Sometimes you'll hear it referenced as proximal and distal attachment points, because it can get a little bit confusing depending on the position of the body. So if we go here, we've got the 5th to 12th rib. So it's a simple matter of just counting the ribs down. So if you go from here, this one's going to be rib 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Okay, so rib number 5, if you follow it around the back, okay, is between your shoulder blades, or almost your armpit level. So it's kind of like wearing a big pair of pants, and you pull them up right up underneath your armpits. So this muscle is really underappreciated, how big it is and how strong it is and how important it is to develop for functional movement because of its size and the different things it does. So the first thing to appreciate is it attaches onto ribs 5 to 6, so half your rib cage. And it's not just a small attachment, it's basically the whole part of the rib that it's going to connect onto there. So really important to appreciate that. So when you are doing core work and when you're doing breathing, because this is also a big muscle in respiration, all right, your external oblique working with your internal oblique is going to be a really, really important tool. So whenever I'm doing any back rehab with clients or shoulder rehab with clients, one of the first things I'm always interested in is how they're breathing, primarily because of the impact of the core muscles on the rib cage. And then because the shoulder blade sits on top of the ribs, so if you're not breathing well, then the ribs won't move properly. So then the shoulder blade won't move properly, and kind of going down the spine. If you're not breathing well, the diaphragm's not going to dome well, the ribs aren't going to move well. And because all these muscles attach onto the ribs, that's going to affect their ability to stabilize the lower back as well. So, you know, the reason why we call them the core muscles, because they really are central to a lot of movement in the body. So that's the kind of the origin. Now, if we go down into insertion, we've got the anterior superior iliac spine, or the ASIS. So we come back here, sorry. Anterior superior iliac spine. So that's this whole kind of ridge. Well, that's the crest, this kind of bony crest that goes along the top of the pelvis. And the ASIS is this often this part here, where the ridge is there. Anterior half of the iliac crest. So we've got basically to where the iliac crest ridges are its height, its top kind of point. So the whole part of the front part of your pelvis, or the anterior part of your pelvis, okay, right up there. And that's going to line up typically with the 12th rib there. And then we have pubic tubercle and linear elbow. So pubic tubercle is the pubic bone. So that's cut there, but that's tendon's going to come down into here. So where you've got these rough kind of bony elements there, that's where the tendon is going to attach. So right onto your pubic bone. And you've also got this ligament here. This is called the inguinal ligament. So that's like your groin ligament, if you will. And so you're going to have some fascial attachments onto this big ligament here. And you've got this space in through there. So there's no abdominal space, no external oblique coming underneath this ligament here. So you do have a little bit of a space under there. And this is typically, in terms of body composition, that's what creates the ridge or the V shape in particularly men when they get very lean, like low body fat percentage or low body comp. You'll get this ridge coming down through here. Okay, so if your goal is to kind of lean down and get very, very kind of get abs, if you will, once you can get this ridge happening through here, you know you're pretty much almost right at the end of that journey. Okay. All right, easy to say, not easy to do. And the last attachment point here is for the external obliques is the linear elbow, which is that long ligament connective tissue that comes down from the xiphoid process down to the tubercle bone here, the pubic bone here, the pubic tubercle. So there's going to be fascial connections that wrap around right to the front. So essentially, when you add in the thoracolumbar fascia here, thoracolumbar fascia here, the fascially will connect into your obliques there, and you will also have, you know, things like your quadratus lumborum down here as well. So when you add in the internal oblique, the external oblique, the rectus abdominis, the transverse abdominis, the quadratus lumborum, erector spinae muscles through here, you get a full kind of like 180-degree wrapping left and right. So a good 360 kind of unit, or a corset, if you will. So when you exhale and when you contract, all your stomach contents get squished into your spine. So that's a big part of the stabilization component of your core work there. Okay, so the next thing we want to appreciate is the movement. So we go to motion. So we have the classic sit-up type movement, or trunk flexion or spinal flexion. So here, the pelvis is kind of fixed in position, so there's no movement through the pelvis. Following the line of directions of the abdominals, they're pulling you down this way. So that's going to create that sit-up type movement or trunk curl. The lower back here will lose its curve, so that'll flatten down into the ground. So imagine if you're lying on your back, you'll have a natural curve here, natural lordosis on your back. So essentially what you'll do, your weight will be kind of orientated somewhere around on the sacrum and somewhere on the kind of the mid thoracic, kind of T5, T6, kind of mid shoulder blade area. And then you'll have a natural lumbar curve here. So when you're starting, this will be more of your neutral spine position. But when you do a sit up, you will flatten that curve. So that part of your back goes flat. And that's a very natural movement. And then the abdominals are pulling the ribs down. So this should happen ideally on the exhalation phase. And the reason for that is when you inhale, the ribs will expand to fill the lungs up. Okay. And then as you exhale, the muscles will contract here to help pull the ribs inferiorly or downward. And that can conjunction with the muscles coming inward will push the kind of stomach contents, the liver, the spleen, the intestines in, and that helps to push the diaphragm back up. So it helps to kind of dome the diaphragm back up to its resting position. So it's an exhalation muscle. So typically there are two kind of patterns of breathing. There's autonomic breathing where the body is kind of taking care of business. You don't need to think about it. And then there's conscious breathing where you're intentionally contracting and relaxing your respiratory muscles to get bigger and deeper and longer breath holds, extending the exhalation, or kind of like doing double inhales to inflate the lungs more. But typically the external obliques, because they depress the ribs down, they are very powerful in exhalation. So when I teach Pilates or core training classes, I'm always cueing when we're doing a sit-up type movement, you do that on the exhalation phase. You can do it on the inhalation phase. It just kind of doesn't work as effectively because when you breathe in, you're pulling in air into the lungs. So the inflation of the alveoli, okay, is like you're blowing up balloons and then you're trying to compress the balloon back down mechanically. So there's a pressure there and it typically will feel quite uncomfortable. But the body can do it. Like it's kind of got some good redundancy in that regard. And there is also another thing called reverse abdominal breathing, where you can kind of, on the inhalation phase, you can contract the abdominals and pull them in. Okay. And what that does is basically stables the lumbar spine. So it locks out the lumbar spine, and then it focuses more on getting the intercostals to work. So you're getting more of a focus on intercostal spread. So it's a good way of training the intercostals to kind of really help kind of get more work done. So there is definitely use for it. And at the same time, you're compressing more of the air, more of the gas in the lungs, and that creates a lot of heat, a lot of pressure. So anytime you increase pressure with gas pressure, it creates a heat. So it's not a form of energy. So in like a yoga practice or a qigong practice or a martial arts practice, you're compressing and building up this kind of pressure, and then you're expressing it. In Tai Chi, we call that Fajing, where you're expressing the energy, you're releasing the energy. But anyway, I digress. So that's the sit-up type pattern. And then if we go into rotation, so you follow the line of direction of the fibers. So if this muscle's contracting here in rotation, so twisting, so if the pelvis is stable, it's going to be pulling in this direction. So you're going to get this rotation that way. At the same time, you'll have the internal obliques on the other side where their fibers going up this way, and they'll contract as well. So you get this kind of cross contraction, external oblique to internal oblique. Okay. So that's the rotation component. And then if we go down to trunk flexion, we have just side bending here. So if we turn this around. So as that contracts, you're going to pull down side bending. And this is going to work in conjunction with, like, you can't do this movement without using the internal obliques as well and the QL. So you'll see here, that's the internal obliques there, and you'll have the QL sitting underneath in here. And you can see, like, it's such a great way to stretch the back, because on the opposite side, if you pause here, you're going to get the erector spinae muscles here getting stretched. You're getting that muscle there, the internal oblique stretched, transverse abdominal stretched, and the QL stretched. So one of the best ways to stretch your lower back is to actually do side bending. Okay. And if you can do side bend with a little bit of rotation, you'll get a really, really deep stretch. Now, the problem is that typically side bending with rotation is also a mechanism of injury for a lot of people's disc pathology or disc injuries in the lower back. So it's not bad. It just needs to be done progressively and with good technique and on the exhalation phase. So come back. So we come back here to the start. So you would breathe in here in neutral. And then as you exhale, you focus on contracting the left obliques here. And then that will then pull you down into this stretch here. Now, if you focus on contracting this muscle as well, you'll get reciprocal inhibition through opposite muscles on the other side, and so then they'll relax more. So you can do these stretches two ways: as passive stretching. So if you were just standing up here in a standing position, you just leant out to the side, okay, and you can contract these muscles. All these muscles here will eccentrically lengthen to hold your weight. So that's another way of getting a stretch through there. So you'll get the eccentric lengthening because the line of gravity is coming down through this way. So these muscles here basically stop you from falling over. So you don't really get a really strong abdominal contraction in the standing position if you're trying to get these muscles working. Okay, so they still, you can still contract and pull them across, but essentially the weight of gravity, the weight of the body, weight of your body and gravity will pull you down this way. So these muscles don't really work too much. The way to kind of resolve that, if you flip this around, so you're in a side plank. So imagine this is the arm that's on the ground and this is the side that's underneath. Then these muscles are working really, really hard to hold you up and stop this weight of gravity coming down this way now. And so then you get a really strong lower back muscular contraction here, internal external obliques, QLs, TVA, all working in this region here. And then you get that counter stretch on the other side. So if you can develop clients or your own training into being able to do good side planks, and literature just shows that if you can get this kind of side plank working really well, it's really, really good for backs. Of course, a little bit of warning, if people have got irritated lower backs, back injuries, this could be too strong a position. So you'll need to rest them down to make it easier. And so the easiest way to get this one working is to lie down on your side, bend your bottom leg and have your top leg straight and just do sideline hip abduction or sideline leg lift. And once your leg typically goes past the horizontal plane and starts coming up, you're going to be using these muscles in here to lift your leg up in the air. So you start to get kind of good oblique work from the other side and glute work. So that's what we mean by kind of co-contractions, when you start to understand when muscles work together in different positions and angles, then we get these teams of muscles working. Now, as I mentioned before, I'll go back. The external oblique is also a breathing muscle. So if we put in the diaphragm, diaphragm, get my mug out of the way. So here we have the diaphragm. And does the diaphragm have a motion on it? It doesn't have motion. That's good. So what will happen is when you inhale, the air is going to come down the throat into the lungs through the bronchial tree, and you have the 5 lobes, 2 on the left, 3 on the right. And that's going to fill up the air, so that's going to expand. For that to happen, the diaphragm contracts and domes down. So this kind of flat part of the muscle here gets pulled downward or inferiorly. And what that does is it changes the atmospheric pressure within the lungs. So when you compress gas, and then when you kind of like make more space, the pressure in that space decreases. Okay. And once the pressure in the lungs is less than the external atmospheric pressure on the external environment, then air will passively be drawn in here in like a kind of like a suction or a vacuum type situation, and air gets drawn into your lungs. Then as you exhale, as the diaphragm moves back up, the pressure, atmospheric pressure in the lungs is greater than external pressure here, and then the air gets pushed out and drawn out. Okay. So really breathing is just changing atmospheric pressure of gas, air in the lungs. And we do that mechanically by the diaphragm and the obliques working together. So if we want to bring this diaphragm back upwards, we need to contract the abdominal muscles to pull the ribs downward, and that helps to push the diaphragm up. So it's actually quite a complicated movement pattern. And when I see people who have had either lower back problems, pelvis problems, kind of shoulder rotator cuff issues, neck and shoulder issues, that can all impact and affect someone's respiratory pattern because of the connection to the rib cage, connecting the diaphragm to the spine, connection of the core muscles to the pelvis. Conversely, once we teach people how to breathe correctly, and we teach people how to breathe correctly during movement. So, for example, typically when you reach your arm up, that's an inhalation. Now, the reason that's an inhalation is because we want the shoulder blade to go into depression a little bit to allow the acromion to spin up to clear space so you can get this reaching effect up here. If the shoulder blades don't lift because the ribs is not lifting, so you can try it. So you can fully exhale and then reach your arm up and you'll feel like you get a little bit jammed. But if you inhale as you lift the arm up, all of a sudden you've got space. So when you learn how to move with breathing with movement, it just allows the body to work with more freedom and less restriction, and therefore movement feels better and muscles will engage correctly. And it's a really, really, really effective approach to rehabilitation that I've kind of developed studying all kinds of different movement practices. So everything from yoga, Tai Chi, Kung Fu, kettlebell training, just traditional kind of strength conditioning training, Pilates. And then once you study all these movement systems, you kind of start to realize they're all essentially doing the same thing. And if you train it with good respiratory kind of pattern, it's the real key to a lot of different exercise training positions and function. Makes everything work better. Okay, so if you want everything to work better, understanding your obliques, how they work with the diaphragm, is really important. And if we just put in the other abs to finish off, so let's put in the rectus abdominis, rectus abdominis. We got the rectus abdominis there, and then we go into internal obliques. Internal obliques. Let's put it on the right. And then transverse abdominis. Abdominis, dom in us. Okay, that's the system. What's the transverse? Where are we? Helps me spell things. Transverse. Here we go. Okay. So here we have what I consider to be the real important core muscles. So we have rectus abdominis, external oblique, and you can see here that line of fibers coming down this direction. We've got internal oblique with a line of fibers coming in the same direction. That's how you get the rotation when they work together. We have internal oblique on the inside. So you can see internal oblique on the inside. And they do wrap around and connect basically with the rectus abdominis. Okay. And into the linea alba here as well. So you get this kind of whole 360-degree wrapping. Then you have the diaphragm superiorly through there. And then if we let in the last thing being the pelvic floor. Pelvic floor. Floor. Here we go. And then we have the pelvic floor. So that is basically your abdominal in a unit. Now, something to kind of keep in mind in here when we go into the breathing video, we'll do a little more detail in here, but as you inhale, the diaphragm domes down this way, it's going to push all your stomach contents downward. And so then your pelvic floor is going to basically catch those. All right. So when you inhale, there should be a lengthening or eccentric contraction of these muscles to kind of create a little bit more space and to help with that kind of control that inferior movement down here. If your pelvic floor muscles aren't working very well, you don't get that freedom of movement in the pelvis, and that can have all kinds of ramifications in terms of how the femur is moving inside the acetabulum. If you're getting actually good anterior posterior pelvic tilting, if you're getting stabilization in this kind of outlet here, this inferior outlet, and this all works with the respiratory muscles. So the superior diaphragm and the inferior diaphragm, they have like a pumping movement, they work together. So when we go into the breathing videos coming up soon, we'll spend a lot more time kind of breaking that down. But keeping in mind that the obliques themselves are going to be critical in moving the spine in flexion, so the sit-up movement, in lateral flexion, so side bending, and in rotation, and not shown here, but in the exhalation phase, particularly by pulling the ribs down. So essentially, like the sit-up is your exhalation phase. So when you do a sit-up position, you're breathing out. So it's essentially the same thing. So four really key things that the external oblique does in conjunction with all these other muscles. Okay, so that's a nice little intro into the external oblique, one of your essential core muscles. If you really liked this video, if you found it helpful, please do leave me a thumbs up, a comment, like and share, all the good things. If you have any questions regarding the abdominals, particularly in functional movement, please leave the comments below. Always happy to answer them. I love getting questions and feedback from you guys. And stay tuned for the next video where we'll look at, I believe we might do the actual diaphragm and the intercostal muscles next. We're going to start looking at breathing mechanics, one of my passions particularly. So wherever you are, hope you have a great day, and stay curious, stay humble, keep learning, and keep doing the things that you do love to do. And we'll see you in the next video. Okay, ciao.